Let's continue studying different types of controls that will help us offer a better user experience and a friendlier interface. We'll start with the SD Maps control to see information on a map. And then we'll see the rating control for numeric attributes. We'll continue with the SD Smart Grids control type that will allow us to view grids with improved features, and finally, we'll talk about the switch control that we can use with Boolean attributes. Control type is a property of certain controls that affects the way in which a control will be displayed and used. Depending on the type chosen, different particular properties of each type will be displayed in order to be configured. As we've seen, to give event participants a list of nearby restaurants that offer discounts, we've created the restaurant transaction. We want the grid that implements the list of restaurants not to be shown in the standard way, but to be shown as locations or pins on a map, since we already have the location of each restaurant, latitude and longitude. We can change the grid's control type and choose SD Maps from all SD controls. Remember that, to be able to use it, we need a Google API key corresponding to our app signature. Without this key, the maps will not be shown at runtime and the standard grid will be used. The key is configured in the main object, in this case, in the object menu for Smart Devices Event Day. In the Android group of properties, we'll find the property Android Google Service API key. To obtain the key, we access Google Developer Console and register the app we're developing. For more details about how to obtain the API key, you can visit our wiki, where you'll find simple instructions to do so. We must enter the name of an attribute or variable of the grid, where we'll have the geolocation information. This can be geolocation or geopoint. In our case, we'll use the attribute restaurant geolocation. To display it, use the map app of the device. In the case of Android, Google Maps. At runtime, a map will be shown with all the points, in our case, the restaurants. Similarly to what happened when tapping on an item of the standard list, when tapping on the pin in the map, first, the chosen element will be shown, as the row specified in the grid. And when tapping on the line, the default action will be called, which, by default, will be the detail screen of a restaurant in view mode. Now let's see how we can implement SD Maps in our app. First, let's configure the Google Maps API key in the application. To do so, we go to the properties of the Event Day object, the menu for smart devices, which is the main object of our app. There, within the group of Android properties, we'll find a property called Android Google Services API key. Before, a property at the Android generator level was used. This property has been kept for compatibility with previous versions only and is called Android Maps API key. We'll only use the property at the Event Day object level. And now we'll open the object Work with Devices Restaurant and go to the list. In the grid, we'll change the control type property. Note that it doesn't have a value, and therefore it's shown as a standard grid. We'll change its value to use SD Maps. When we change the control type, we'll have additional properties available, which will be particular to each type we choose. In this case, selecting SD Maps will show the properties. Show My Location. It allows you to display the location of the device in real time. Map Type. It allows you to change the type of map used. It can be the standard map, it can be the satellite view, or it can be the hybrid type. The property User can choose map type. By setting it to true, we enable the user to change the view. Location attribute. This is the only mandatory property that we must configure. In this property, we must enter the name of an attribute or variable that will contain the location. It must be a geolocation or geopoint data type, and in this case, we'll enter here the attribute restaurant geolocation. This is where we store the longitude and latitude of each restaurant. In the property pin show my location, we'll place an icon to show our location. Also, the properties pin image attribute, and pin image class allow changing the icon of the grid locations. We'll leave the default values. Show traffic. It allows you to set if you want to show traffic in real time on the map or not. Initial zoom. It allows you to set the initial zoom. By default, it'll try to show on the map all points, so the zoom level will be dynamic. Center. It allows you to set where the map will be centered, which can be in your location or in another specific location. By default, it'll be set in the middle of all visible points. Selection layer. It allows us to select a location at runtime and move on the map, leaving a fixed icon in the middle, which gets the position and triggers an event. We'll see its use in the advanced level. Directions layer. At runtime, it allows drawing the route or direction between the points of the grid. Each point or position in the grid is given by the attribute or variable configured in the property location attribute. In addition, it'll allow us to choose the type of transport we want to use, for example, by car or walking. We'll also see its use in the advanced level. Now we're going to compile the application because since we added an attribute, this modifies the server-side event. Also, the value of the Google API key property is an APK file configuration. Now we already have the application. So, we'll go to the list of restaurants. And now we can see that the map is displayed with the points. Note that this different icon corresponds to our location, which is Plaza Independencia in Montevideo. Since we're using an emulator, and it doesn't have a certain position, if we want to emulate a location, we need to configure it in the emulator. To do this, we go to the More option next to the emulator, and in the longitude and latitude fields, enter the coordinates that we want to emulate. By default, it's not configured. After configuring them, we need to press the Send button. If we tap on one of the points, it displays information about the restaurant in a table, and if we tap again on this table, the default action will be executed. In this case, you'll access the detail screen of a restaurant. For example, we'll change the value of map type and return to see how it looks. Note that the map has now changed, and now it shows a satellite image. Let's put the property back in standard value. Let's now activate the traffic layer view, and we'll go back to the emulator. Note that now there are streets shown with green, orange, or red. This is real-time information provided by Google, in this case, about traffic conditions. Let's leave it back in the default value. This is not only valid for grid controls. Controls of attribute or variable type also have the control type property to change the default behavior. The types offered depend on the control data type. Let's see how we can let the user provide a rating using stars for the attribute restaurant rating. By selecting the rating value as control type of the attribute, these two properties will be opened to indicate the maximum star value and whether this value will be applied to each one. This is to say, if the user selects 2 stars when entering a restaurant, the stored value will be 2, and the maximum value will be 5. This will be valid for read-only attributes, as in the case of the restaurant's view. This will also be the case if it's an editable field, as in the case of the Detail and Edit mode, where the user selects the desired number of stars. Let's see it all in GeneXus. We open Work With Devices Restaurant, and then we'll go to the list. In this case, I've already done a little work on the grid. What I did was add the attribute restaurant rating to the grid below restaurant address. Also, I arranged the image so that now it takes 3 rows instead of 2. The table has not been changed. As you can see on the right in the emulator, as there are now more rows, the image is too big. Remember that I was using fill-keeping aspect ratio. What I'm going to do now is to enter fixed values at the top of the rows so that this doesn't happen. We'll enter in rows style the values 30 dips for the first row, that of the name, and 20 dips for the 2 remaining rows, those of address and the rating. Note that when I enter a numeric value, it automatically assumes the dip unit of measure, which is the default. Let's change the attribute control type for rating. We leave the properties with maximum value and increment by default. We save and run the application. And now we can see that the attribute value is shown using stars. If we access a restaurant, in the detail, the attribute is still shown as numeric. And the same happens if we enter the edit mode. Let's go back to GeneXus and change it in these 2 screens. We select the General section in View mode, and we'll change the attribute here as well. We'll use the rating control type and leave the default values. We do the same in edit mode. Change the control type. We'll save everything and run the application again. So, now let's go see it in the emulator. We enter a restaurant. Now the control appears with the stars. Let's edit this restaurant and enter the stars we want. For example, 4, and we'll confirm. Now it's going to show 4 stars, the same as in the list. So let's go back to the presentation. Let's see a type of control that we've used in the application that we saw at the beginning of the course when we showed, for example, a list with the speakers. It's the SD Smart Grid, which, just like SD Maps, is a type of control for grids. When we use it in the grid, it'll allow us to configure certain properties. The most important ones are Auto Grow, which indicates whether the size will be adjusted when the content is larger than that of the container. Scroll Direction, which indicates whether the scroll is horizontal or vertical. And Items Layout Mode. It has 3 possible values: single, multiply by quantity, and multiply by size. With these values, we can change the number of items to display. Let's see how it's all used in GeneXus. I've got a panel prepared. In this case, I used the object type Panel for Smart Devices, which is called Speakers List, and I added it to the Event Day menu so that we can see it. This panel has a main table with a fixed height of 250 dips, so that we can better see the effect of the SD Smart Grid control. The grid is a standard grid with the attributes speaker image, speaker full name, speaker ID, and company name. In addition, I'm using the speaker info stencil that we previously created. I'll change the grid properties to use SD Smart Grid. By default, scroll direction is vertical and the item's layout mode property is set to single. This way, it behaves like a standard grid. A single item is displayed because item's layout mode is single and the scroll is vertical. Let's change item's layout mode to use multiply by quantity with a value of 2. There we can see that the grid will contain 2 items per row and the scroll is vertical. Now let's enter 3 items. They're all going to be reduced. And now they can hardly be seen. Note that all these changes can be made using live editing directly. We leave 1 again. Let's now change the scroll to be horizontal. This is the configuration we used in the application we saw at the beginning of the course, with the option multiply by quantity set to 3 items per column. Let's try with 2. Note that it shows a small portion of the image to the right, indicating that there are more items. Again, the view is automatically updated. And now we'll use multiply by size. Here you have to specify a minimum and a maximum height. Note that in this grid, the items have a height of 80 dips. This is why it has that minimum value. Let's enter 100 in the minimum height. Only 2 items will be shown, because the row's height is 200 dips, and the table height value is 250. So, this exceeds the maximum value. So only 2 items are shown. But what happens if we enter 200? Only 1 item will be displayed. Great. Now let's return to the presentation to see another type of control. Another type of control that is frequently used is the switch control, which is used to present attributes or variables with Boolean value. For example, in the speaker transaction, we have the attribute speaker is keynote, which indicates that the speaker is a keynote speaker. Let's do it directly in our application. We open Work with Devices Speaker and go to the section General. We're in Edit mode, and we don't want to show this attribute in View mode because it's an attribute that we only want to include in the back end. We just changed the default control type to switch. Then we save and run the app. We open Speakers. We enter a speaker and edit it. So there we see the control, and we can turn it on or off. This is going to end up recording a true or false value, so we leave it at true. Great. There are many more controls that we can use in our applications. For example, for attributes or variables, we can use SD Scanner to read data from a bar or QR code. SD Linear Gauge to display information in linear or circular ranges. SD Multi-Wheel that shows a wheel to set the values. SD Physical Measures, which is very useful when we work with physical measurements such as temperatures, weight, or volume measurements. And finally, a stopwatch, which will allow us to execute events automatically when a certain time is met, for example. For grids, we also have more types of controls, for example, SD charts to show pie charts or timelines. SD image gallery to show images, SD paged grid that has a special way of paging and displaying the number of grid pages, or SD matrix grid that allows us to work with complex information in two-dimensional tables. This is only a limited list. You can look for more information about this and other controls in the GeneXus wiki.